Hello and welcome to this reflection, which is being led on behalf of Portsmouth Cathedral. This week the Church throughout the world celebrates the Feast of the Ascension, that moment recorded by St. Luke where the risen Lord ascends from his disciples up into heaven to rule over all things as Lord and King. And this is meant to be a good news event. But it's very difficult to imagine that those first disciples must have thought that it was good news. Instead, they must have felt rather isolated and alone. After 3 years of following Christ's ministry, then travelling with him to Jerusalem and seeing him tried, executed, and then buried, with that feeling of desolation, grief, and mourning, which is recorded in that account of those disciples on the Emmaus Road, where they feel so utterly sad and devastated. It must have been very strange to then suddenly encounter the risen Lord once again and eat with him, and then suddenly for him to depart. They'd only just got him back, and now he was gone again. They must have been completely distraught, feeling really quite lost. And so in order to think, well, why is it good news? You have to think, well, what is it that the Holy Spirit is about that could possibly be good news? And in order to do that, you have to think of Luke and Acts as a sort of diptych, one recording the events of Christ's life, and then a second one recording the events of the life of the Church. And you'll remember that Luke's Gospel begins with the Holy Spirit. It begins with the overshadowing of Mary. It begins with that sense of Christ being sent out. He declares in the synagogue at Nazareth that the Spirit of the Lord is upon him because it has anointed him and sent him to bring good news to the poor. And so in Acts, the story begins with the Ascension. Christ goes up and then sends that same Spirit that has empowered his own ministry upon the life of the disciples and the new church. That church's ministry, we are told through Acts, goes out from Jerusalem and reaches to Rome at the end of Acts. The entire ecumene of the civilized Roman world has been impacted by the life of the Spirit. And it's good news because ultimately the life that the church comes to bring, the life that is at the centre of Paul and Peter's preaching, is that same Spirit that is meant to be good news to the poor, that which brings freedom to the oppressed, sight to the blind. At this time, the church and indeed the world is challenged. We can all feel very isolated and alone, just like those first disciples, as we are all in lockdown at the moment. The role of the church and of Christian people is to live out that life of the Spirit, to be good news, to bring hope and joy and peace, even when life is difficult. And so I wish you a very happy Ascension Day and Ascension Tide, and a very happy Pentecost when it comes. And I ask you to remember your call to live out that life of the Spirit.